If you're interested in hypnosis and influential communication, there's a good chance that you have some knowledge, that you've spent some time studying hypnotic language patterns and procedural approaches to influence and persuasion. Now, all of this stuff is really, really great, but there's one area where people often let themselves down, even people who have studied quite deeply and quite thoroughly. Over the last few years, I've been training hypnosis and influential communication. I've had a lot of people come to me for training, a lot of people come to me for personal mentoring, who already have put a lot of time and work in on study. And they're often very, very good with their language, and they often have a good sense of the procedures they have to do. The area they tend to let themselves down in is the area of non-verbal communication. They are not using their non-verbal channels fully to optimally support their outcomes in hypnosis and in influence. Now, I have a theory. I think there's a reason why this happens. I think it's because if you look at hypnosis strategies, if you look at linguistic strategies, you can break that down and really get hold of that cognitively. It's a relatively easy thing to study and understand with your intellect, with your prefrontal cortex. Non-verbal influence, non-verbal communication impacts on us on a different level. It impacts on us very deeply, very profoundly, often at an instinctive level, often at a very deep level within the mind, way outside of the area we're normally used to addressing consciously. So it has this deep impact. It makes it more difficult to get hold of cerebrally and understand. And I think for this reason, this is why it's less well explored and less well studied and less well understood. And ironically, of course, that's exactly the reason why it's so powerful. That's exactly the reason why it's so worth studying, because it impacts so deeply and profoundly on people at the fundamental base levels of who they are and what they do. Okay, non-verbal influence is profoundly powerful. Let me share a story with you. A number of months back, I was going to be going out on a Friday night, and there wasn't time to make anything for supper especially, so I went to get fish and chips. When I went to the fish and chip shop, there were no parking spaces outside at all, so I parked up on the pavement. Now, the way it is, this is just opposite my offices actually. The way it is there's a very, very wide pavement. In the evening, I didn't think it'd be a big deal, so I just popped myself up on the pavement there and went in the fish and chip shop. So while I'm in there, somebody lets me know there's a traffic warden outside, a parking warden, and I think, oh shit, I've got to go and deal with this. So I went outside and I see this traffic warden writing out a ticket for me. Now, the way I understand it, or the way I understood it here in the UK, is once the traffic warden is writing out a ticket, they're not allowed to scrap it. They have to complete the ticket. So I'm thinking, oh, so I'm in trouble here. But I set my intent. My aim was right then and there to influence this guy to scrap this ticket. So I start moving towards him. I'm not thinking a lot about what I'm going to do. I just went with the first thing that seemed right, but it was a strategic piece of influence. What I did was based upon sound principle and based upon things that I'd studied and explored and played with in the past. I went straight up to the guy, looked him in the eye, and I went, oh, like this. And the guy looks at me back, pauses for a moment and says, well, you're parked on the pavement, in an angry tone. So instead of engaging him linguistically at this point, I just looked at him again and did exactly the same thing. Oh, this parody of crushed emotion, over the top. I'm not doing it that well now because I'm outside of context. But the effect was quite dramatic. At that point, he paused again, looked down at his pad and said, well, move it now. At which point I just smiled, jumped in the car and moved it. Now, what was that about? How did that work? My intent at that point, as I say, this is a piece of strategic influence, was to get him to write off the ticket, to not complete it. Now, this is a traffic warden. There's no point arguing with a traffic warden. There's no point trying to get angry. This is a guy who is used to people linguistically wrangling with him in many different ways all day long to get off the tickets they're writing. So I've gone in there, and I've gone in at a very primal level. My aim in that moment was to trigger his empathy circuits. I'm not trying to engage him intellectually. I want to engage him really primitively at the level of emotional response. So I've gone in to press his empathy buttons, and I've done it by putting on this display, this parody of crushed emotion. It was over the top, but that's fine. It's a mask that triggers a response. So I've put it on, and there's the tonal element to it, the groan, the sound, the face, everything. The idea is his mirror neurons fire off, his empathy circuits kick in. This is my plan. Now, the initial response was a pause. Something was going on inside of him. That suggested to me, I wasn't cognitively thinking about this at the time, but it suggests that he was a little bit confused. It was a bit of a pattern interrupt for him as well. He didn't know how to respond or what was happening. He would have been having an internal response, but not necessarily understanding it. So after the initial pause, I've repeated it again after he said, you're parked on the pavement. He's tried to re-establish his position. He's tried to get his position back after being knocked off equilibrium with this empathic hook. He's tried to get his position back, but you're parked on the pavement. And I've repeated it, the same maneuver. I already know it works because it just worked for a moment. I hit him with it again, and then, we'll move it now. That's his response. He goes with it. So I'm banking on him being enough of a human being, not even enough of a human being, enough of a mammal to connect into that and to respond to that. That was my intent. That was the result that happened. Now, I give that example because it is a piece of pure non-verbal influence. It's pure non-verbal influence. There were no words. I uttered no words at any point to him. There was nothing for his big prefrontal cortex to grab hold of in making sense of this. So it's a perfect example of non-verbal influence. However, what I'm not saying is that this is an alternative to using linguistic strategies in influence. It isn't. Absolutely, even when using linguistic strategies, you have to support what you're doing non-verbally. You have to shape and create the context that the communication is going to be delivered in non-verbally. And if you fail to do this effectively, your influence, your piece of influence, will fail too. That's the unfortunate truth of it. And this, as I say, is the area where people really, really let themselves down. Now, for me, I've had a lot of opportunity to study the non-verbal dynamics. Now, both formally and on a cognitive level, but also informally in the sense that I've been out in the world, done a lot of street hypnosis, done a lot of mentalism, this kind of thing with people. I run workshops, I deal with clients, I have a business, so I'm involved in business interactions and business exchanges. And one of the things I've been especially interested in is how the non-verbal elements support the dynamic, the exchange, and it is often the make or break situation. It is often the make or break situation. When I first ever went out into the world to do some mentalism stuff, some Darren Brown style mentalism stuff, I wasn't filled with self-belief. I wasn't filled with what people might call confidence. I was filled with fear, I was filled with anxiety, and that showed in my non-verbal communication. And I didn't have impact. I didn't have the impact that I needed to have to be able to draw these people I was doing this mentalism with into the reality I wanted to create. So I was failing at the first hurdle. I go up to people and say, excuse me, and it was already game over. My body language was entirely inappropriate. The level of status I was communicating was entirely inappropriate. And I became very much aware that when you go up to people in the street to do a performance, to do a piece of mentalism or a piece of street hypnosis, you need to become the leader of that dynamic as quickly as possible. And it isn't just in this context. It isn't just in the context of mentalism. It isn't just in the context of hypnosis, of client work, of all these kinds of things. In everyday life where you want to have influence and impact upon people, you need to come across in the right way. You need to have a certain impact, a certain presence. You need to be aware of the status dynamics that underpin every single human interaction and how to influence those with your non-verbal communication. You need to know how to create the right vibe, the right context in which to deliver your more precise linguistic stuff. Now, if this is stuff you haven't had the opportunity to study deeply yet, I would very much like to invite you along on the 26th of January 2013 to Letchworth Garden City, to my offices and my training room in Letchworth Garden City. You can be one of 10 people to come along and personally study these non-verbal elements with me. And I can guarantee you it's going to blow your mind and it's going to make a huge difference to you. You will not see the world in the same way after coming on this workshop. And you probably won't be able to be in the world in the same way. It will change how you walk through the world, it will change how you show up in life, and it will change the level of personal impact and personal gravity that you take with you, okay? Now this stuff is absolutely key. It's absolutely key to being an effective influencer and an effective hypnotist. It is mostly, I'm going to say now, it is mostly going to be geared at everyday influence, becoming an influential person, an influencer. It is not going to be shaped around formal hypnosis, okay, if you're interested in formal hypnosis. However, I will say that to create the context in which to do formal hypnosis, especially if you're interested in impromptu hypnosis, you need to know this stuff. You really need to know this stuff. And to get your formal hypnosis in client sessions working really, really well, managing clients, especially difficult clients, if that's your interest, you need to know this stuff as well. Okay, so I'd like to extend an invitation to you to come along to my offices and training room in Letchworth Garden City on the 26th of January 2013 to have an in-depth experience of exploring the non-verbal elements, the fundamentals of non-verbal influence with me. If you need any more information about this, or if you'd like to find out more, just please do use the comment section below. I will happily answer any questions that people have. Be aware there are 10 places only on this workshop. There will not be any additional places put on the workshop because it's in my own private training room, which has a capacity of well, about 14 people, but I keep it to 10 because I like to have the extra space. Okay, so that's all I need to say for now. Questions in the comment section below. If you want to join me, make sure you book a place quickly, only 10 places. Looking forward to seeing you in January. If you come along, you're going to learn wonderful things. Until then, take care of yourself.